Venzine, Duchy of Corwyn, County Yzny Pochod, Barony of Heartscross, the Ash March. 5 Coruna Cycli, 22 days after the Red Storm at Westsong. Caston found frustration an unwelcome companion. Her blood was up, her senses keen for any hint of useful information about the ever-growing number of horsemen to the west. She needed to find her hunting party and what? They don't need me to tell them about the horsemen. This close to where the ash trees end, a body would have to be blind, deaf, and dead not to notice a herd that size. No, her hunting party was composed of Rakosh and her allotment of the Perkoy household guard. They surely wouldn't need her to help or guide them. The truth was that she wanted to fight. The problem was that she was dressed for a leisurely ride in what, this close to Edmund's encampment, were considered safe lands. She wasn't unarmed, of course, but she had no sword, only an exceptionally long dagger. A good enough weapon for close combat with a fool of a highwayman, but less than ideal to deal with an armed and armored soldier. And they are indeed soldiers. She hadn't had more than a glimpse of them through the trees. It would have been too great a risk to get closer. Still, she'd seen both Leather Scale and Jane Hallberks on more than a few of the folks she'd spied. She thought she'd even seen a pair of men wearing thick wooden breastplates beneath their hide cloaks. These were called Beimortrea, literally wooden shirt in Jodenth, and were reputed to stop arrows in much the way a wooden shield did. This is Dukarn's army? What she'd seen certainly looked Jodenth, but then that was part of the deception they suspected, wasn't it? Jodenth who'd had enough of raiding or Harn's hirelings trying to use the outlaws to his advantage. The danger, at least in the short term, was much the same. Pagoda knows his way around these trees, and Rakosh is a hunter. They'll be fine, surely. I'll likely be more use back with Edmund at Yzny Love. Jaffiel's ears were suddenly flat against his head. More than that, his nostrils had begun to flare. Clearly something had made him uneasy. Caston could feel his body coiling, preparing to bolt. She tightened her grip on the reins, listening. Nothing. Not even birdsong. Then the scent struck her. Linseed oil and wax. Someone had recently unsheathed the sword. That scent was too telling to be anything else. Its relative strength sent two facts racing one another in her mind. It's fresh and it's close. Hells. She loosened her grip on the reins, slid her feet so that they sat more firmly in the stirrups, and prepared herself for Jaffiel to Necht to Necht, Kovalunstadter. A man's voice, low-toned and delighted, came from the trees just to the east. To Gestela, Tiford. He rolled his R's less severely than the Odensbreck she'd learned, but she had no trouble understanding him. No, you don't, daughter of Corwyn. You stay quiet, my pretty. Caston froze, letting the genuine sense of fear, of anticipation, flower in her chest. She rode them like a wave, tightening her grip on Jaffiel's reins to hold him fast. The horse gave a little squeal, pawing at the ground in obvious anxiety, but otherwise held his ground. He's alone. No sniggering, no other foot. No, there's a second and a third, or I'm a fool. Tivanum girath, Verik. Gehemver. Getivani nekta yarbrand. She didn't need to make her voice sound uncertain. She knew the Odin tongue, but rarely had much chance to practice it. Much like her knowledge of Norkish, it was easier to translate what one heard than what one wished to say. My father will be angry, war captain. Be his servant. Be my protector, not my enemy. Speak the traitor's tongue. Hearing Jodensbreck pour out of your traitor's mouth makes me sick. Traitor's mouth? She was about to offer a reply when he spoke anew. Get down from your horse. She complied, marking the other two figures from the corner of her eye. Step to me. Do it smartly before I get bored. Again he rolled his R's. She took 2 steps toward him, Jaffiel's reins in her dim hand. Stop! I didn't tell you to bring your steed. My kinsman will take care of him. If I let the reins go, he'll bolt, Varric. Again Caston used the honorific, though she doubted anyone else this man knew would consider it fitting. She'd kept her voice small and uncertain. It was still too soon to be certain of much. She'd heard 2 more, but hadn't marked them visually yet. Growling, the man stood up at last. Caston looked him up, then down again. He had a hunter's build, lithe of limb and likely able to walk or run for long periods without tiring. She marked his dark, sun-baked skin. No hair atop his head, but a long fringe of dirty blonde started just above his ears. It hung in a scattering of small braids, as did his graying beard. He wore fetid furs and half-cured hides, with a baldric stretching from his right shoulder to his left hip. An ancient-looking sword hung awkwardly in both hands near his waist, blade pointed down beside his left boot. Adge, on the Oshvim. Adge held her horse. To her right, a youth close to Fetim's age walked toward her, glaring. These two are related, surely. His hair is long and full, but he has an unbroken version of the swordsman's nose. If this one's seen 16 springs, I'm the Emperor's heir. Behind the bushes from whence he'd come, she saw a girl much closer to Moxu's age, watching this tableau with wide, dark eyes. The youth, Adge apparently, stalked toward her, wearing a look of uniquely male insolence. Were he alone, he would have had far less confidence. Else he might even have worn a nervous, hopeful smile. She kept her grip tight on the reins as he neared, lifting the hand that held them to her breast as if keeping them close to her heart. His eyes followed the hand, lingering upon it for a beat. As if waking from a daydream, he reached to snatch the reins away. Caston fought for a moment, as if too frightened to give up her horse. He yanked, meaning to take the reins with a sudden burst of strength. As her arm was pulled to near full extension, she stopped resisting. She released her grip, causing Ash to momentarily stumble and Jafiel to squeal and paw at the ground. The youth moved to adjust his footing, but it was too late. Barely a blink, and it was over. Her dim hand free of the reins, she brought that same arm up to wrap around his throat, even as she slipped behind him. With her right hand, she drew the knife at the small of her back, pressing its point against the tender flesh below the hinge of his jaw. Taking a half step to center her balance, she forced Adge to lean back awkwardly against her left thigh. His hands came up instantly, trying to peel her forearm away from his neck. Venom! Venom! Tu Venom nekt van tu, Adge. Nekt you, nekt hem brand. Your father can't protect you, Adge. Not in time, not with his sword. She then shaped her voice toward the man. Or do your children speak the trade tongue? He shook his head. She was dismayed to see he looked more angry than afraid for her prisoner's life. Coward! Thou your Alisven! You would take the life of a boy? You would revenge yourself in such a way? Thou your Alisven! He delivered this in a strangled, R-rolling roar. If I am a wicked serpent, Varric, then too Ed said thou will brandiman. Said thou will brandiman, and necht Venom. You are a false warrior, and no father. Who is it that sent him to me, risking his life, heedless of what might happen? You have made war on me and lost. Now, make the peace. Pay the price in pride, not in blood. She searched out his eyes. Lay down your sword. It should have been over, but no. With a near feral growl, he charged. He brought the sword up high over his head in both hands and simply ran at her. It was clumsy, but the look on his face was nothing short of savage. She waited for as long as she could, had an instant of indecision, then shoved the unfortunate Adge at his father. The man brought his sword down, hammering at the boy's shoulder out of unfocused rage. Blessedly, he only managed to hit him with the blunt spine. The blow caused Adge to fall at his feet, tangling them for a beat. That part was what Caston had hoped for. The swordsman struck Adge a second time, then kicked him for good measure, cursing. The sickening crack meant at least one bone hadn't survived unbroken. That hadn't been her intent. Still kicking the boy, as if turning away was an act of deepest concentration, the swordsman tore his face up toward Caston. His eyes were wide and a somehow malevolent green. She drew a quick draught of cold air, gauging his gait. A single thought flashed before her. You didn't have to die, Odenth. Without so much as a grunt, she pushed forward out of her stance, shoving the dagger up under the shelf of the man's chin even as he drove toward her. She held it there, supporting his weight as the strength went out of him. She could smell the meat in his breath. A sweet, pork-like stench mingled with the fresh blood filling his mouth. No sooner had this registered than she saw the shocked look of clarity in his sage-colored eyes grow glassy and still. She heard the unmistakable sound of first one, then two more arrows rend the air from somewhere behind the newly made corpse. My lady! Caston! Rakosh's voice, sounding pained but mightily relieved. There may be more, said she, and said no more for the moment. Her voice was calm, though there was a clipped sharpness to it that she rarely showed others. Certainly, in the short time he and Andre had been in her service, she never had call to use it. She didn't waste time looking for Rakosh in the tree line. Instead, she dropped the dead swordsman, eschewing her dagger for his sword. To her right, she saw the boy Adge on his belly with an arrow in his back. He wouldn't survive. The arrow was buried deep where the heart rested. His fingers were twitching, as were his feet. Rakosh was coming toward her. Nodding to him, she held up her hand and walked toward the unfortunate Ash's side. She called his name once, twice, no reaction. Standing, she did the merciful thing, finishing him with her newly acquired sword. Are you well? Did they... No, you don't look wounded. I was afraid for your life, lady. I know you know something of how to fight, but... Rakosh shook his head. We must hurry. While no more are here, there are numbered others like these, and close. She ignored this. There was a girl. There was. She was quick and small. I missed her with both arrows. Kerstin forced herself not to react. The idea of killing a child, even an enemy child who would surely report what she'd seen to the rest of her people, was abhorrent. It was pragmatic, but there were limits, weren't there? Lady, his voice was both ragged and anxious. Where are the others? They were ambushed. I'm an archer, not a swordsman. Begota commanded me to run and warn the encampment. The woods are full of their scouts. Perhaps they were captured. Hells, let them have been captured. She moved over and pulled the baldric off of the man's corpse. As she'd thought, it held a back scabbard. She sheathed the blade, slung the baldric into position over her right shoulder, then saw to her dagger. There wasn't time to do more than wipe the bulk of the blood from both the blade and bright hands, so she contented herself with that. I fear we're doomed to walk. She'd stood, turning as she spoke, only to find Jafil still standing by, utterly nonplussed, idly cropping grass. Or Jafil can bear us, if he consents. She shook her head, mounted up, then held a hand down for Rakosh. Edmund had been wrong. Those two, at least, had been Jotunth. The rest of the army might be mercenaries dressed to look the part. She supposed it was possible, but those two had unquestionably been Jotunth. Rakosh grunted as he got into place behind her. You all right? Ready? His breath sounded a bit labored, but his response was steady and sure. I'm as ready as may be, lady. With that, she turned Jafil, making for Yizny Love as swiftly as she dared.